Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Microsoft has released an extremely critical patch. The race against hackers has already begun, and we'll share the details with you. Plus, secrets about Amazon's EC2 infrastructure have been revealed, and we'll share those with you. And the war story this week? Well, it's a real pisser. You're in for a treat. All that and more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 49 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We streamed this episode live on March 15th, and this episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com. I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is provided by ScaleEngine.com, which is epic. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the tech, the admin, and the teacher, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for coming out.
Hey, man. Welcome back to TechSNAP.
Yes.
We got a fun show today. Two of the stories in the top of the show are some of the ones that I followed this week with some very high level of interest. So I'm really glad we're going to talk about those. But we've also got a rockin' roundup. So I want everybody to stay tuned.
Huge roundup.
It's huge. So stay tuned for that. But I want to remind you before we get rolling into the news that the Jupiter Signal comes out next week, and that's Jupiter Broadcasting's monthly, I almost said weekly, but no, it's monthly newsletter where we give you behind-the-scenes information about the network, more information, maybe expanded upon stuff that was talked about in shows. We do roundups of all kinds of things. Alan's even put a puzzle in there before, and so it's a great newsletter, and it's only out once a month, and we promise not to spam you. And we'll have a spot in the show notes where you can sign up for that, or you can just go over to bit.ly/Jupiter Signal, and there's where you will find the fine Jupiter Signal. And I think it's next. I think middle of next week is when you could expect to see it. So you've got a little bit of time to sign up. All right, Alan. Tons of news today. Should we jump into our first news story of the day?
Yes, because this first news story is the reason why my Windows machine has an uptime of like 2 hours instead of a month.
Well, so a lot of Windows administrators were probably a little freaked out this week because Microsoft announced that there was a pretty major vulnerability in RDP.
Yeah,
what are the details?
They don't use the super critical, you should patch this immediately as soon as the patch comes out.
Right.
Right. They don't pull that out very often. So when they do, you're scrambling around like a crazy person.
Yeah. So what happened?
So Microsoft released, their regular set of patches for March, and one of them is marked as like super uber critical. So it's a patch for RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol. And basically there are two vulnerabilities that are fixed in this patch, and both of them are quite significant. So Microsoft released a major security update to fix two critical vulnerabilities in Remote Desktop, which used to be called Terminal Services. It's CVE 2012-0002 and 0152. So the first vulnerability, the most important one, has to do with the way that RDP accesses memory that has been improperly initialized or deleted. And basically, an attacker, by sending specially crafted packets to your RDP service, can cause code that they supply to be executed on your machine, which means the attacker can install a Trojan, add their own user to the system with full admin privileges, access or modify your data, and just, in other words, take over your whole machine. So
this is like one of those deals where just by sending some data via the network, they could... I mean, so that kind of stuff leads to like the spreading of Trojans and worms.
Unlike a usual virus or Trojan or whatever, the user doesn't have to do something for this to happen. Now, desktop machines aren't, a lot of people do have Remote Desktop enabled on their desktop machine.
Well, and that's funny because Peregrine Falcon in the chat room says, who doesn't turn Remote Desktop off? I gotta say, I've worked for clients where they've actually exposed almost every server to the internet with Remote Desktop, just for administrators. And Amazon EC2 is known for using that as one of the default methods.
Well, it's basically basically every Windows server that you like, if you rent a dedicated server or an Amazon instance or any virtual private server, that's going to have Remote Desktop on.
Right.
If you my desktop has it on so that, when I'm out somewhere and I need something off my computer, I can come in and get it.
Oh, yeah. Right? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a very handy protocol. And to be fair, I mean, Microsoft really has developed a pretty robust protocol there. I mean, you can do a lot of stuff through a remote desktop session.
Well, and because unlike other remote desktop tools like PC Anywhere or VNC and so on, it's based on the Windows API for drawing the window. So rather than sending you JPEG images of the window on the other computer, it's sending the instructions your computer uses to draw the window. So basically, it's doing a vector way of doing it.
I never knew that.
On your other end, like that's why on your other end, you can have themes turned off and stuff so that you're taking less data. And so it means it works better over slower connections.
That's interesting.
It makes it usually a lot better than VNC, for example, over a slow internet connection.
Right. And that explains why with like Windows 7 and a newer version of the client, you can actually even get like Arrow in a remote desktop session.
Yep.
Now, I guess, I look at it as this way, is SSH over the years hasn't been flawless itself, and SSH is turned on many boxes.
It's had basically the same type of vulnerabilities before, and it's been just as big a deal. So it's just, the patch is out, just you have to patch your stuff.
That is really, I think, the number one reason why Alan put at the top of the show notes is because, and Microsoft said it in their vulnerability page here, they say that they suspect because of the code is out there, that this is going to get taken advantage of fairly quickly.
Yes. And there's going to be huge numbers of Windows servers, especially at places that rent dedicated Windows servers. A lot of them, probably like places like Rackspace and so on, they're probably going to force this. They're going to install it on your server and reboot if you don't have it done by the end of today. Or something to that effect, because they don't want thousands of infected machines running all over their network and running denial of service attacks against the CIA and messing up their network. And
time to patch your Schmidt, as the chat room says. And in the past, this would have been like, if I was still doing contracting, this would be a really hard week for me to do Jupiter Broadcasting, because I would be working with all of my clients to schedule downtime. And the problem is their downtime is usually when I would need to record shows and things like that. Exactly. So I remember back to those days, and I'm just thinking, my God, I'm so glad I don't have to deal with this thing, because this, for some system admins, can be a real scramble time.
Oh yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Alex.
I don't have to do Windows, so it's not a big deal for this particular vulnerability is the problem. But this stuff happens all the time,
Do you have any other thoughts on that story?
Well, yeah, there's a bit more. There's actually a second vulnerability. The second vulnerability has to do with the way that the RDP service processes the packets it gets. So an attacker who exploits this vulnerability by basically sending a certain series of crafted packets in a certain order can basically cause the RDP service to stop responding.
Oh, nice.
To basically freeze the service.
So hack a box and then throw that at it so that way people can't get to it to see what's going on.
Possibly. Or just do that in general.
Just be a dick.
If you just scanned across the Amazon range and hit every Amazon box.
Yeah, somebody would do that.
It would literally lock thousands of administrators out of their Windows boxes.
Yeah.
Because when it's at Amazon or a remote data center, you have no other way to access it.
Right.
Maybe if you're at a place like we are, where we have IPMI, where we have an out-of-band management system, we can use that. But for most people doing Windows servers, remote desktop is all you have. And if the remote desktop service gets exploited by this second vulnerability, you won't be able to access your machine.
Right. Good points. Sir.
So the vulnerability affects every version of Windows, basically every version of RDP, ever. So Microsoft has released patches for every single supported version of Windows, which is XP Service Pack 3, XP 64-bit, which is special because it's actually Server 2003 backported. And anyway, Vista Service Pack 2, Windows 7 Service Pack 1, Server 2003 Service Pack 2, Server 2008, Server 2008 R2, Server 2003, 2008, and 2008 R2 for Icanium processors, the data center editions, the compute cluster, all core versions of Windows servers, everything. Actually, even the Windows 8 developer preview. So if you're using the Windows 8 beta, you're still vulnerable.
Wow. Microsoft's response to all of this, though, has shown how much over the years they've matured as a company in handling these kind of high-profile impact vulnerabilities, because
they actually have processes in place, and they have this grading system for how important it is to each update. And
like you said at the top, when they label something as critical, as a community member, they really mean it. You really need to patch. And they've done pretty good with testing too. They still have some issues and compatibility problems, but
that's why most places have a policy that says unless it's flagged like super critical, we wait like weeks before we install it, so that sometimes these updates come out and then all of a sudden Microsoft pulls the update because it's breaking half of the machines on the internet. Actually, that hit my machine one time. Some update, I think prior to Service Pack 1 for Windows 7. Basically made my machine not want to boot. I had to get the instructions on another computer and like hand edit some XML file in safe mode to get my computer to boot.
Oh boy.
Because of a botched Windows update that they later fixed. But because of that, I usually wait a little bit before installing. Mostly I wait because like next time I reboot, I will install my updates. But this one forced me to have to reboot sooner.
I think, especially if we have any Windows system admins in the audience or people that are interested in this area or becoming system admins and want to know how these security implications affect the job. Alan, there's a link that you have there in the show notes at the bottom of the story that goes to spiderlabs.com, and the guy documents the race for MS-12020. And he talks about how like there's blogs out there where they're doing analysis on this vulnerability already, and you can go get some really thorough reports on the vulnerability itself. There's also already a bounty out there at the tune of $1,451 for somebody to develop a Metasploit module to scan and identify this vulnerability.
If you have a lot of machines, it's like, all right, we think we installed it on all of them, but can we just scan and make sure all of them have it?
Right.
Although, if you're using one of the frameworks like NetExpose, which is the wrapper around Metasploit, if you have SNMP or some other way, you can basically just check whether the KB, whatever the number is for this, the fix for this vulnerability is installed on the machine, and that would give you at least a way to tell if the patch has been installed. Having the Metasploit module and actually being able to scan and make sure that this doesn't happen is still very usful, and you'd want to be able to do that. But in the meantime, until that actually exists, because right now it's just a bounty, you can, a lot of network management systems allow you to get a list of the installed applications. The regular, Windows installer thing, and from that you would get a list of every patch that is installed. And you could use that to tell if this fix is installed on each machine.
Right on. So there's a couple of good things to look at. Again, a link to that blog, which documents that whole thing, is pretty interesting.
That's something you might want to do if you have, for example, like Nagios monitoring a cluster of Windows machines.
Yeah.
You would, if you're using SNMP or whatever, you would actually create an alert that says, send an alert if any machine ever shows up on our network that doesn't have KB2874, whatever the number is.
Right on. All right.
A list of them or whatever.
Now, our next story takes us to some behind-the-scenes details about Amazon's EC2 cloud infrastructure system, which I always love to look behind the curtain and see how these guys do it. Before we get to that, I want to mention, though, the affiliate links. Just a real quick plug. If you go over to the bottom of JupiterBroadcasting.com, I know I talk about these all the time, so and it's just because it really does help. If you go there before you shop, you'll find links to Amazon US, UK, Newegg, ThinkGeek, Best Buy, Mint.com, Audible, and we even now have, thanks to some nice dudes in the IRC chat room, a Chrome extension which will automatically tag your shopping session whenever you go to those sites, so you don't have to use the links, and gives us a small percentage of your purchase. And basically what that does is it allows the viewers out there and the listeners out there to support Jupiter Broadcasting while they're buying things like toilet paper from Amazon or office supplies or whatever it is, and you're also giving something to the show, and we make a little revenue off that, and it helps us during the times where we don't have a lot of sponsors. So
yes, and it doesn't cost you anything extra, so just remember to click the link.
Yeah, that's all you got to do. And we also, like on SciByte, we have things like Audible book picks that we recommend to people to help out. And also on some show posts, if you're a Flatter user, there's also a little Flatter button where you can use the Flatter system to say thanks. All right, Alan, why don't we talk about this Amazon EC2 story, because this is fascinating stuff.
Yes, so just like Google and a bunch of other companies, Amazon doesn't actually give us any details about what their infrastructure actually is.
Right.
However, researchers are always trying to, guesstimate. And so one of those researchers has published their educated guess as to what Amazon has as far as infrastructure. And based on knowing how much power they use, how many servers you can fit in a rack, and a bunch of things like that, they estimate that Amazon has to have at least 450,000 servers spread between their 7 different locations.
That's a lot to manage, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Well, if you remember, the similar estimates for Google were somewhere between 900,000 and like 1.1 million.
Right, yeah.
And, Google's not really renting theirs out to anybody, where Amazon is. Right? Amazon has a number of different things going, right? They have EC2, S3, CloudFront, and like 50 other services now.
I used to work in a data center that had an area that looked almost exactly like this picture. Of course, all data centers do. that was quarantined off and was dedicated for Amazon. So it was a commercial data center that anybody could rent rack space in, or have a
Amazon
shelf.
had a cage.
Amazon had a whole section of the data center fenced off, and those were all dedicated to Amazon. You couldn't go over there.
Right.
And they had a separate keycard access to get to. But it's like so instead of building their own data center, they just basically came up with some sort of partnership with an existing commercial data center.
Yeah, you can rent floor space, and it's called a cage. That's where the fence thing comes in. And basically, rather than renting individual racks, you just say, I want this much floor space, and they fence it off, and that's yours, and you can do whatever you need with it.
Yeah. Very cool, interesting details. Yeah. What do you think? Do you think that's an accurate number?
There's some evidence towards and against it. So in the actual post, there's a link to the actual methodology, like how he came up with these numbers. Mostly it's based on, you can fit X number of blades in a 10U blade system, and you can fit 4 of those in a 48U rack. So this is how much you could fit. Although, there have been a couple of presentations done by people at Amazon with screenshots. Of course, you can never tell if they're like real or just, clip art type thing, but showing them using 1U servers rather than blade servers. But I think at Amazon scale, the blade server probably makes more sense. But from what I know, at least originally, the EC2 thing was all based on AMD Opteron systems, right?
I don't remember exactly. Sure I do remember they had NVIDIA Opterons. GPUs. I don't remember what
but their actual CPUs at the very beginning anyway were a bunch of Opterons. And so based on that, I'm not sure if you can get those in that type of blade setup. But I guess
not in a blade, I don't think. But of course, I'm sure their technology
is just a bunch of motherboards. So
yeah, but usually I think because the Opterons typically run very hot. I haven't seen. I'm sure maybe they are now. I mean, it's been years since
It's hard to say, and I don't know how Amazon's hardware has changed, right? Like they're probably not using the same old Opterons because they don't even make those ones anymore,
right?
So their stuff is probably quite a bit different. But so most of the research was based on analyzing IP address utilization, which there's one IP address isn't necessarily always one instance on Amazon, and definitely doesn't correlate to one hardware machine, but so on. And then basically based on their estimates also, they were looking at the ratios of the number of servers at the different locations, right? Like they have US East, US West, and then they have like one in Ireland and one in Singapore, and I forget what all the locations are, but they have a whole list of locations. And now their US West one costs more money. If you want to rent an Amazon EC2 instance, it's like an extra 2 cents an hour if you want it on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And that's based on their data center in Oregon. But based on how the IP addresses are routed, it looks like approximately 5,000 racks of servers are at their US East data centers, which are mostly in Virginia. And basically that represents about 70% of all Amazon cloud servers. Seem to be in that main.
And you remember, and we remember back, they had that big East Coast outage, and a ton of really major sites went out. And it seemed even sites that had presence on the West Coast of the EC2 infrastructure also had presence on the East Coast and suffered some sort of outage.
Yes, because basically the East Coast one is the cheapest, and so that's where most of the people use it. Right? It's their main site, and so it's a couple cents. Like if you want Ireland, it's more than the extra 2 cents you pay for Oregon. It's quite a bit more.
I wonder if that's power related. Do you suppose? Maybe it's like
part of it might just be scale. It's cheaper to have a lot of servers than to have a few servers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so Amazon wants to concentrate everything in the East Coast unless you have a particular need for other locations.
Right. That makes sense.
But based on the analysis, it looks like their US West location is actually very small. They estimated only between 40 and 50 racks in the West Coast.
Holy crap. Maybe I did see their data center.
No, apparently the Oregon one is new and is deployed in containers.
Okay, Oregon. Yeah. Okay. And they had, of course, now I was told it was their S3, so maybe that's not included in this, because I was told what I was seeing was their S3 infrastructure.
Oh.
So maybe I assume that was just lumped up in the EC2 brand, but maybe it's a separate set of servers. Yeah,
sure. But also, they have these different availability zones, right? The whole idea is that, their West Coast isn't one location, it's a bunch. And to get redundancy, you run more than one instance in different physical places so that if one dies, they're still okay. Mm-hmm. So basically, if you're using two instances in the West Coast, you don't pay extra to transfer data between them, even though they might not be in the same building. They're in different what are called availability zones.
Right. Okay.
So you get two different buildings on the West Coast, and you get redundancy, but it's still cheaper than if you have to do one on the East and one on the West Coast.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And
That
so
makes
yeah,
sense.
it's possible that what you saw was part of their setup, but apparently the stuff they have in Oregon is deployed in containers.
Yeah, that's big now. That's the way all the big companies that are building their own data centers are doing it now.
Well, if you want to set it up really quick, you don't want to wait for a building.
Yeah, well, and there's a lot of advantages to it too.
Well, first of all, if you're building a big building, it's like every time you pour concrete, you have to wait 30 days for it to harden before you can put load on it.
Right.
Right. So there's
delay number one.
It takes, you have to dig a hole and build a building and blah. If you buy a parking lot, you can drop containers on it.
Yeah, yeah. And they're already pre-wired with internally. Yeah. I mean, they were usually you can already have them shipped with the computer servers in them and already connected. And yeah, it's a total win.
Yeah. And so there's a link to a couple other posts about the sizing experiment, but importantly, there's a bunch of information about the methodology they used to come up with these numbers.
They even show what they estimate is Amazon's growth for over the last year too. Yeah, which is kind of interesting.
And then also looking at some other details that might contradict what these numbers say.
Oh,
for example, there was one that lists Amazon EC2 was listed on a supercomputer list at one point, and it showed them only having 22,000 cores. So that would imply they have less than 22,000 machines.
Right.
Now, I think that might have been a misunderstanding where the article was partly about Amazon Silk, which is the web backend for their Kindles. And, if that is based on a dedicated cluster of 22,000 cores that's built on top of EC2, but is not all of EC2.
Yeah, it could be just the way they're slicing the number, because maybe it's only 20, maybe that's only the number that they let people buy out or something like that. And the other ones are used for infrastructure.
The Silk thing they reserved to themselves is only 22,000 cores.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it could be that. It could be, yeah.
Because they're, so vague about it, it's hard to get actual numbers.
Yeah.
And then also in the last week, there have been a number of outages on the US East cluster for Amazon. On March 10th and March 15th, which was today, actually, there was one early this morning. For at least 20 minutes, only other instances inside the US East could access each other. So if you weren't actually inside EC2, you couldn't reach, sorry, maybe it was S3. Anyway, there was, for at least 20 minutes, nobody could reach anything at Amazon East.
That kind of stuff makes me nervous.
Which is, 70% of their infrastructure.
That makes me nervous.
And so I linked to Colin Percival. He's the creator of TarSnap and a major FreeBSD developer, the security officer.
We've talked about TarSnap.
Yeah, he uses Amazon S3 as a storage system for his backup service. And so he has his own monitoring of it and watches it very closely and usually talks about it when it's down. One of his tweets was complaining about the fact that he's at the Amazon's status page looking for updates, and he's like, it's usually more useful to just search Twitter.
Yeah.
For is Amazon down?
Yeah, seriously. I mean,
because Amazon finds out about it about the same time as everybody else when it's down, right? And it takes them a minute to post something on their webpage, and it takes people less time to tweet about it.
Even if you don't ever use Twitter for anything, it is very, very handy. For example, if you have some sort of outage in your neighborhood, but you can still get on your smartphone or something like that, use the search.twitter.com search engine to see if other people are complaining about the same outage. It is such a helpful troubleshooting tool. Yep. I've used it for DSL outages. I've used it for online major outages. I mean, I can't think of how many times it's come in handy. In fact, one time, I even used it to monitor the lines for a movie at the local mall. I could just see, well, it wasn't local. It was about 20 miles from my house. But you could actually just see people tweeting about the line, and I knew when to leave my house to get down there. So seriously, even if you're a Twitter hater, go check out the search tools. They can be useful.
Yes, I've used it before, too. It's like, is anybody else's cable out or power out?
Yep, as long as you can still get to it on some sort of device.
Yay for the mobile phone.
All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's about it.
All right, well, the how secure are different types of passwords debate has been going on forever, but sounds like there was a little more fuel thrown on that fire this week with a story about
both sides, basically.
Yeah, okay.
So we've talked about before, we actually showed the XKCD cartoon about how a password like correct horse battery staple is more secure, has more randomness in it than a password that's literally just random numbers and letters.
Gibberish, yeah.
Yeah.
Like all of mine are, thanks to LastPass.
Yes, exactly. It's easier to remember something like correct horse battery staple.
Totally.
But also, people started to realize it's a lot easier to type correct horse battery staple on your cell phone because of the autocomplete.
Oh, yeah.
Right? As long as they're still English words, then they're going to be in the dictionary.
But the question I always have is I've always been told if you do alphanumeric characters just by themselves, then then it doesn't take much for a cracker just to chip away at that. But if you throw in special characters.
Right. But if your password is,
super
64
long.
Characters long, if it's really long, that makes
a whole tweet or something
Well, if you're over 14 characters, that the address, every time you add one more character, the address space goes up by, even if you're just doing uppercase, lowercase numbers, 64 times as hard, right? There's another 64 combinations they have to do.
Right. Okay. All right. So
it gets 64 times harder every time you add an extra letter to the password. So, if you can do like 16 or 20 or 24 characters or whatever in total, because you got whole words on there, then you're doing pretty good.
So then was this was an article that was posted that came out and said that...
actually, a couple of separate articles. So the one is some research into what are the advantages of using multi-word password phrases, right? And how do they work? And also, in theory, they work very well. But in practice, are people going to screw them up by using sentences rather than a bunch of random words?
Right, yeah.
Like correct horse battery staple is just a bunch of words and it doesn't make sense as a sentence.
Right.
But if you use an actual sentence, then after the first couple of words, the later words become very predictable. Right? The words that could come after the first 4 words in a sentence is much more restricted.
Yeah, I love to eat bananas for dessert is predictable. Right?
Yes,
because
it's when people use quotes from movies or taglines and things like that, right?
I'm all out of. It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of gum. See, that'd be nice and long.
Yeah,
pretty well known.
What these researchers did is they noticed that back when Amazon had pay phrase, which was this idea that you came up with a unique sentence and that became your way to pay for something.
Don't they still have it?
Apparently, it's been phased out.
Oh.
So what basically, you came up with this globally unique phrase, so no two people in the world could use the same phrase. And it was basically tied to your credit card. And when you want to buy something, you typed in that rather than your credit card.
Yeah, they pushed it heavily for a while.
Yes. And so as part of that, when you tried to set one, if it was already taken, you were told, no, that one's already taken. Okay. So the researchers basically got a dictionary of 20,000 words, multiplied them by each other, and started hammering away at the pay phrase.
Oh my gosh.
To see which ones were taken. And basically from that analysis, they found that a lot of people were using awfully weak pay phrases.
Surprise, surprise.
And not only that, but also the fact that the minimum was only 2 words, which isn't enough.
So I'm browsing through the report that you've hyperlinked in the show notes here. This is some heavy stuff they did. Yeah. Oh, okay, here we go. Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, they have a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah.
And, it's ongoing research into it. And the reason this whole subject came up is Cambridge University just came up with a study suggesting that multi-word passphrases are still vulnerable to dictionary attacks and therefore aren't as very good. So basically, they did their research based on using a full Google Ngram for 5 words. So basically, coming up with lists of 5 words based on what people would actually use. And they found that most of those, even with using 5 words in the password, right? Like even the XKCD one, correct horse battery staple, is only 4 words, right?
Right.
But using 5 words, more than half of the users came up with 5-word password phrases that had fewer than 30 bits of entropy, or that required fewer than 30 bits of work to compromise the password. And so, that means there was only 2 to the power of 30 separate combinations. And, or after you had tried 2 to the power of 30 combinations, you had broken half of the passwords.
Right.
Which is quite low.
Yeah.
Whereas, if you follow the math from the XKCD one, correct horse battery staple would be 44 bits of entropy. But that's considering it as a whole password, not as words. And if you know that the password is made up of separate words, then you can do a bunch of things to lower, to reduce the possible combinations you have to check.
XKCD. Boy, aren't they just always the providers of ultimate wisdom?
Yes.
That is something. That often comes up. Any other thoughts on that one?
So Bruce Schneier, who's a popular cryptography expert, has a post about it on his blog where he talks about the security of 5, in this case, the 5-word passwords. And so there's, we have linked to the actual research paper, the PDF from Cambridge, plus there's actually in the link from the first site that's for the multi-word passwords, they have a bunch of PDFs and talks from conferences and stuff. And so it's all there for you to read and get into if you really want to.
If you really want to. Although
the main takeaway is, if you're going to use multi-word password phrase, make sure it's not a sentence, and you want to use random words.
Ah, yes.
And probably at least 5 or 6 of them.
That is the important takeaway.
Yeah. When you put the words together, it should make absolutely no sense.
I hear you.
So you don't want to take something from a movie or a book or anything like that.
And if you do, take it from 3 separate movies from different time points in those movies. No, I don't know. You got to give yourself some sort of code that you can always go back and retrace it. Maybe that'd be a good way to do it. Well, Alan, who never worries about passwords ever is the beautiful Danica Patrick over at GoDaddy.com, who are the fine sponsors of this here TechSNAP. And Danica tells me all the time that she uses LastPass, but she also is a big fan of using random words in her password. And the big thing about GoDaddy is I think I want to focus today on their .co offer because it's going away at the end of this month. And while we're halfway through it, you can get a .co domain name for $7.99. I mean, that's probably the cheapest you're ever going to get it.
That's the same price as a .com. Well, normally a .com is $9.99, but if you use TechSNAP 7, you get $7.99.
Yeah.
So it's the same price as a .com, whereas normally, because all the good .coms are taken, a .co normally costs $30.
Yeah. And, honestly, if you could use the TechSNAP 7, because that's also a great code, and that'll get you a .com for $7.99. But, I mean, really, the .co thing is going to expire soon. So that's CoFeb 8 to use that. Or, like Alan said, TechSNAP 7 to get a .com for $7.99. But also, at the end of this month, the private registration offer is expiring. So you might want to take advantage of that soon, too. You can get private registration when you get your domain if you use the code March8 when you check out. And that's a $9.99 value. So you get that for free. And Alan and I are always big fans of getting private registration, especially for like a private family blog or something with just your friends, a site like you just want to toss up there and don't want to be harassed.
Unless you're like really selling a lot of, unless it's like for e-commerce, you pretty much want private registration.
And of course, a big thanks to GoDaddy for their continued support of TechSNAP and the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. And thanks to everybody who supports them. All right, with all that done, it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails and war stories to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com. We're just going to do a war story this week and kind of a quick one because we got a big roundup we want to get to. But keep sending your questions and your feedback to TechSNAP at JupiterBroadcasting.com, and we will try to answer more of those next week. Now, Alan, this war story is a little shorter, but it still comes from the other Alan, who's worked on the front lines at IBM for years and all sorts of companies. So he's got a bunch of great stories, and he provided a whole stash of them that we can go through and pick and choose from that we want. And so this week, you grabbed one
that's a short one.
Yeah, I think will fit nicely. All right, so take it away, sir.
Before we start that, I just wanted to send a reminder to everybody that BSDCan, the conference for FreeBSD and all the BSDs, is May 11th and 12th at the University of Ottawa.
Yeah, that's going to be there's going to be at least a good 20, 30 people at that, right?
More than that, actually.
Oh, okay.
I think they're having 20 or 30 presenters on top of, the whole core team, which is quite a few people.
Anyway. So this is BSDCan 2012.
Yes, and they have, if I got a link to the list of talks, and there's a bunch of good ones. I pulled a couple of really nice ones out of the list here. Unified deployment and configuration management.
Oh.
So if you're trying to manage configuration across a lot of servers, virtually networked FreeBSD jails. So jails are the FreeBSD. It's not virtualization, but it's just containerization.
Right, I love jails.
But allowing to do virtualized networking inside of those so that you can create much more complex network configurations. pfSense is giving a talk about pfSense 2.1 and major support, new features for IPv6 and more, and going forward with what pfSense is going to be. There's an intro to DNSSEC and how you would want to do that in your server stuff. Colin Percival is giving a talk on crowdsourcing security and bug bounties and things like that.
You mentioned the pfSense guys are going to be there, right?
Yep. Fast reboots and Kload, which is a system for basically upgrading your kernel with a really quick reboot rather than a full reboot.
Right.
So it basically allows you to reboot the server without actually going through the BIOS. So rather than powering down and powering back up really quickly and actually booting through the BIOS, it literally just stops everything, switches the kernel address, and then starts everything back up quick.
Honestly, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, because basically the BIOS is the slow part, especially on servers, because there's a lot of things to get initialized and so on. Right. And you got all the RAID cards and all this other stuff.
Yes.
To basically cut that reboot for upgrading the kernel from like 5 to 10 minutes to like 30 seconds.
This looks like a great conference, especially for anybody that's into BSD.
They have optimizing ZFS for block storage, the BSD associate exam, and a whole bunch of things like that.
Awesome.
So basically, the talks are broken down into 3, I forget what they call them, sections or what
kind of
blocks. No, they're streams. They have 3 streams. There's one for developers, one for sysadmins, and then one for, I forget if it's like hacking or what. I forget. But basically, they have 3 separate streams about different sets of topics.
Tutorials, talks, and tourists.
Yeah,
right?
Well, those are the different days. But if you look at like the talks for like the 11th, you'll see there's 3 columns with different colors.
Yes, I do see that.
What are they're labeled?
Embedded hacking security, social security administration tutorial is the ones I see. Yeah.
A bunch of different stuff. But they have different streams no matter what your interest is, whether it's actually developing open source software, how systems work, or just sysadmin stuff.
So where is it and when again? Just so people catch up.
May 11th and 12th at the University of Ottawa.
University of Ottawa. Yep. Right. I'm glad you remembered to bring that up because we want to make sure we got that out to people.
Tickets went on sale yesterday.
Are you going?
Yes.
You are going? Really?
There. Yes, I will be there.
Are you going to bring like a camera or anything? Do you have like a flip cam or anything you can bring?
No, but maybe we'll buy one.
Dude, yeah, totally. Yes, because we got to get some clips on the show for that. That'd be fun.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, if you get something cool, yeah. All right. I'll talk to Angela about that because I wanted to make sure that you do that. All right. Should we read Irish's war story? All right.
Right. So this again is another one from the other Alan. Right. So at one point in his tech support career, he managed to get himself transferred to Mobile's Gold, which is high level support for laptops.
Okay.
Laptop support for corporate customers like insurance companies and places that have too much money.
So the tech support guys that have really proven that they've gotten the good attaboy, they get those clients? Is that kind of what it is?
Or these are the clients that they pay a lot, so you have to hold their hand when they can't manage.
And wear the soft gloves and okay.
So it's a more prestigious position, and usually it also has better hours. They don't tend to call in the middle of the night because if you work for an insurance company, you don't use your computer outside of business hours.
Right. Shoot.
Less call volume, and when a call did come in, it only required to work out if the problem was hardware or software, and then hardware means send in the laptop and we'll fix it, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's nice.
So, he said, too simple, too boring, and I frequently found myself listening to calls from other people just to stay amused. So, thanks to the lack of work, at one point he picked up in the middle of somebody else's call. So the agent says, okay, sir, when did you first notice that the keyboard on your Aptiva, which is a desktop PC, had stopped working?
The Aptiva.
And the user says, well, it was this morning right after breakfast.
Okay.
So the agent asks, have you changed any software or hardware settings recently? And he says, no, I don't think so. It was working fine last night, but today it does nothing. Would you happen to have another keyboard in the house that you could try to see if the problem is actually the keyboard? He says, well, now that I think about it, I might have one in the garage. I'll be right back.
All right, cool.
So at this point, the agent starts typing up the case in the ticketing tool to save time and waiting for the user to get back from the garage. But they're interrupted by a woman's voice on the phone. So the original user was a man. So the woman says, hello, is anyone there? And the agent says, yes, I'm with IBM Tech Support, ma'am. I'm waiting for the man who called to return. And then the woman says, okay, that's my husband. Is his computer thingy not working anymore?
Oh my gosh.
The agent's like, no, ma'am, the keyboard appears to be faulty. The woman's like, Well, that might be my fault. Since my husband bought that damn computer, he's been paying less and less attention to me.
No way!
I had a bit of a set after dinner last night, and he stormed off in his truck, and I peed on his keyboard.
What? He peed? What? She peed on his... The woman
Keyboard.
peed on his keyboard?
Yes.
I mean, I could understand how a dude would do it. But the idea, I mean, did she get like all up on the desk and squat? I mean, how does that work?
I'm not sure. I don't know that I want to know.
What?
So the agent, which I'm sure was having trouble keeping a straight face at this point, says, "Thank you for that, ma'am. That will definitely help me diagnose the problem."
No kidding.
And the woman says, "That's good. I hope it helps."
Wow, she was pissed. She was not a...
Nice pun.
Oh, then I'm done. Yeah. Wow.
So over the next few minutes, the agent had the time to think of how to approach this issue with the user, and he got a devious look on his face. So the user comes back and says, "Hi there. You were right. The other keyboard seems to work perfectly. Can you send me out a replacement keyboard?" And the agent says, "Yes, sir, that won't be a problem. I just need your credit card details first." And the user's like, "Why do you need my credit card details? This computer's only a month old. The keyboard should be under warranty." And the agent's like, "Because I need to bill you for the replacement of your, as your warranty does not cover urination."
Oh, but bump.
Yes. And Irish says, "I'm sure there were more after that, but Irish was too busy rolling around on the floor laughing to actually listen in on the rest of the call."
Wow. That's got to go down in that's got to go down in the record books for that call center in general.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know if I've ever experienced anything that crazy.
Yeah. I've not ever seen anything that crazy.
I've opened up computers and I've seen disgusting things inside.
I've seen ridiculous things. One time, for no reason, apparently, like, IDE cables tend to stick in their slots pretty good. Right? Even if you've really,
it's all those pins.
All
those pins.
Got quite a good bit of friction.
Yeah.
But I discovered one computer in which the IDE cable had been hot glued into place.
What? Better make sure it doesn't...
all the way around. It's hot glue. It was fairly easy to remove, but it was the most ridiculous thing I had ever seen.
Wow. Yeah.
I was just dumbfounded. It's like, I was pretty new, but I was like, who would do that? It's like, doesn't make any sense.
I guess they were maybe going to ship it? I don't know. I mean, that's...
cable keep falling out. It's like impossible. It's... The IDE cable is usually the cable you're worried about damaging, trying to get it out because it won't come very easily.
Exactly.
Suppliers that started putting these, they put those sticker with a tab that made it easier to pull on. And even then, it was just like, you're worried about bending pins and yanking on this thing, and they hot glued it into place.
We can only do so much, Alan.
Yes.
We can only inform the world via our podcast now. What can we say? Well, that was an awesome war story. I encourage you to email yours in techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com. And thanks to the other Alan, also known as Irish Dark Shadow in the chat room, for sending that one in. Man, I can only imagine how funny that must have been at the time. I mean, people must have been rolling. Wow. All right, Alan. Well, I think now that we've got the war story out of the way and a good laugh, it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite make it to the top of the show, but we still wanted to talk a little bit about them, maybe have you follow up on them for further reading, or perhaps even just follow up on a few stories we've covered before. And they're almost all exclusively powered by our Reddit over at links.techsnap.tv. Thank you, everyone who comments over there, who votes over there, and submit links. You guys are awesome, and there's tons of great stuff. And even if you're just a big news hound, I recommend you go over there and check it out. That's also where you will find the list of Hall of Shame that we're keeping up to date, is on the right-hand side of the TechSNAP subreddit, as well as other new features being added all the time by our awesome moderators. All right, Alan. Now, the first story in the TechSNAP Roundup is a new introduction, I guess they're a new company we're introducing to the Hall of Shame.
Yes.
Now,
new inductee.
A new inductee. That was the word I was searching for. It's digitalplayground.com, an online porn site, who recently had their credit card database exposed. About 40,000 cards were on file and got leaked out. And of course, that's always an embarrassing one when it's a porn one, because you just got flagged for paying for porn. Really? And then 2, your credit card got stolen, which also sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one sucks more, but I think whenever we have something that is financially impacting or that is very embarrassing for somebody's privacy, that's almost a guaranteed nomination for the Hall of Shame. And these Hall of Shame recommendations come from the TechSNAP subreddit, so you can always introduce something over there with brackets, Hall of Shame, if you want them to be nominated, and people will vote on the ones they want to go up.
Yep. But apparently the security there was quite horrible, and most of these credit cards, in order to be stolen, were stored in plain text, which is against the PCI DSS, but there's a loophole in the PCI DSS.
Yeah,
so let's get away with it.
I gotta say, if you have passwords in plain text, if you have credit card information in plain text, anything like that, also a pretty much makes you an immediate nomination for the Hall of Shame.
Yeah. Now, credit cards are a little harder to deal with because you can't use a hash like you would for a password because you need a credit card to bill people every month, especially if you're a porn site.
Yeah. Telling you, man, Bitcoins.
It has to be, you have to do it properly. I
guess, I still think Bitcoins might have a chance because they seem like the perfect porn currency for me. Because you can be semi-anonymous with them, and they're cross-country, so you don't have to worry about conversions and you could just run your machine in your basement for a couple of months, earning you the porn Bitcoins you need, and you don't have to spend any actual money. I always thought that was the best. That would have been the best use for Bitcoins, but it never took off. All right, Alan. Well, maybe it will still. We'll see. I'm still watching.
That was one of the things we talked about when Bitcoins first came out. Is the biggest draw to Bitcoins is the fact that it's not reversible,
right?
Which is the biggest problem that porn sites have,
right?
Usually because of the scamtastic billing schemes. It's like free or $1 for the first day, and then if you don't cancel, we'll renew at $59.99 a month, or whatever.
All right, Alan. The first story that we're going to get to in the roundup has me a little nervous out there. It's got the hair on the back of my neck standing up. And check this out. This is an agreement between the major ISPs out there to begin around July 12th. Well,
major ISPs in the U.S.
Right. Yes. Sorry. Around July 12th, they're going to work to become essentially copyright police. Now, right now, the agreement stands between Comcast, Cablevision, Verizon. Dang it, I got Verizon. Time Warner Cable, and some other internet service providers in the United States will soon launch new programs to police their networks in an effort to catch digital pirates and stop illegal file sharing. Now, this is information coming from the RIAA chief executive, Carrie Shimmerman. Now, the RIAA and the MPAA has been sitting down with these large corporations who often also have a stake in the media, like obviously Comcast and NBC and companies like that.
Exactly, or
Verizon, Fios,
Time Warner. It's like Warner Brothers.
Right. So they all have sort of like a vested interest in stopping piracy just to begin with there.
Yes. So it's basically, in this case, your ISP is a member of the MPAA rather than being the target.
Right.
And that's why we're seeing this.
Each ISP, in the way this is going to work, has to develop their own infrastructure for automating the system. And then they're going to take measures to establish databases so that they can keep track of repeat infringers, so they know that they know when it's somebody's first notice or their third notice. And every ISP will do a little differently depending on the architecture, but the idea is that they're all going to share it.
It's basically the idea of the 3 strikes law.
Right.
But basically what it means is, rather than the old way, which started way back in the beginning, where the RIA would find you or think it found you infringing on something and send your ISP an email, which your ISP would then forward to you or whatever.
Right.
This would be an automated system for that would also take care of tracking. So according to this system, it's supposed to be that the RIA doesn't find out who you are, right? Because again, all they have is like an IP address. But your ISP relates that IP address to an actual account or bill. And so by doing this over time, even when your IP address changes, they tie multiple infringement notices to a single account.
Right. So you can't ISP hop.
Yeah. So, no, it'd still be...
Well, if they're going to share that database, which is what they're...
No, I think it's a shared API for how the MPAA and RIAA report to the ISPs. I don't know that the ISPs would be sharing between each other.
Oh, okay. I might have misread it. Okay. Because I was thinking it was going to be something ISPs would share with each other.
Honestly,
so they'd
most people don't have the option to ISP hop.
That's a good point.
Especially each different area of a city will be delegated to one of these companies.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Don't usually, if we got to pick between all 6 of these, there might be a bit of competition. But so basically, the first and second notices are educational, being like, "Hey, did you know that that's illegal?" And then beyond that, it gets worse. And then they talk about possibly shaping your traffic,
Right.
which in this case, they would literally shape all of your traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be paying for more bandwidth than you were getting, which would be, stealing your money, and a bunch of things like that. And now no ISP is actually committed to disconnecting users yet, but, that's likely possible.
Gosh.
And, the nightmare scenario for this is, eventually the government introduces a law mandating that all ISPs support this system and, be able to take notices like this. And, if you're a small ISP, that's a big burden to be able to support this big complicated system where, they basically want you to buy some expensive solution from some,
right.
Consulting company.
Well, and just keeping records in real time, or even just trying to collect in real time the activity of all the users on your network is an extremely high work-intensive process.
Yes, and requires big, expensive Cisco gear.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's funny how that works.
So it's basically forcing forcing ISPs to spend all this money, and basically it's going to force the smaller ISPs out of business, most likely.
Yeah. And then, man, which is always a shame because the independent ISPs have been...
They're the only ones that aren't owned by the movie companies.
Right. Right.
And again, that's why.
And part of me is like, well, I think I'm glad that it's some sort of private collusion that they're working out instead of having a federally mandated solution, which would probably have a bunch of other stuff I don't like in it. But at the same time,
also collusion kind of implies a conspiracy against the public. And
well, and I know that they're not
it seems like it should almost be ripe for antitrust regulations saying, no, a bunch of ISPs can't get together and, members of the MPAA can't get together with all the ISPs they own and force this down users' throat.
Which is that's what's happening. I mean, it's, well, I guess it's just something to keep watching. There's not a lot we can do. We're just kind of powerless to have them make the decision. And I know this isn't what they're doing, but I worry about systems like take the YouTube copyright system, where it scans YouTube videos and finds infringing stuff. In this last week alone, and I don't know if they've just turned it up, I'm all of a sudden getting flagged for copyright violation on videos on the Jupiter Broadcasting channel that are years old. I've gotten flagged for A Beer is Tasty in this last week. I've gotten flagged for Jupiter at Nights, and I got flagged for an episode of The Morgue, and I got flagged for an episode of Stoked that were all from a year ago. And it's this automated system, and they're all wrong. They're all wrong.
All
because
false positives.
They're all false positives, all of them, and it doesn't matter. There's nothing I can do.
We've heard lots of these with the RIAA, right? Suing grandmas and so on that have not stealing any music. And, so if they build a system like this, that might be the only way to break it, is to figure out how it works and basically, how the RIAA is figuring out that you're pirating and fake it. And make it look like every single person is pirating.
Spam the system.
And until that, they can't sort out which reports are fake and which ones are real, and the whole system collapses on itself.
I think you might be right. I mean, that's the only action we can take.
Yeah. In a protest against the RIAA and this type of stuff, specifically them saying that you creating a digital copy of a CD or DVD that you own, that copy has the same value as the original, they've started faxing copies of dollar bills to them. Like, if the copy's worth as much as the original, here, have my money.
Right, exactly. All right, let's talk about this next story in the roundup. Everybody knows that the iPhone and iPad have this service that Apple lets you turn on where you can find your device by going to their website and logging in, and it'll track it. But I've heard stories of people even recovering stolen devices using this service, but your story in the roundup
or third-party services that do the same thing.
Right, yeah.
So in this one, a Dutch court ruled that the user, the victim in this case, having tracked down the location of their stolen device isn't enough to get a search warrant to go to that location and look for the device.
That's weak.
Well, at the same time, maybe not. First of all, if the only evidence that the device is in this location is provided by the victim, and it's
true,
technically the supposed victim, because there's no proof until you recover the stolen property that it was stolen.
All right.
And so, you don't want people to be able to get a search warrant under false pretenses, right? You could see this being abused by the police in a police state. Some fake person says, oh, my iPad was stolen, and the software says it's in that guy's house. And then the police get to raid your house without any cause, right? like we've heard of this before on the internet, where people were like phoning in fake 911 calls and having the SWAT team show up at people's houses unsuspectedly.
Right.
And you could basically end up with the same thing, but people falsely reporting, their stolen iPad is at so-and-so's house, and it's not.
Right. Yeah, okay. Okay.
So, really evidence supplied by the user or one of the complainants or whatever technically shouldn't be enough to get a warrant. So it's actually the proper ruling.
I guess the other way they could go with that is if the iPad had cellular in it, maybe they could get the info from the cellular companies to see what towers it's been pinging in that location.
Possibly,
yeah.
Or, the police could knock on the door politely and like,
right,
stolen iPad here, and
excuse me, Mr. Jude, do you have Mr. Fisher's iPad in your house?
Right, if you scare them enough, and
right.
The police, if they ask to come in and you say yes, then they don't need a search warrant.
That's why I always have my iPads rigged to blow up. If somebody steals it, I just have a button right here. Of course, I generally just accidentally bump that button, so I've gone through 7 iPads. But other than that, no, I kid.
Yeah.
All right, should we go to the next story on the roundup?
Yep.
All right, so we just talked about how the U.S. government is, how ISPs are working to essentially, I think the only way they could determine who's doing what is by having to do some sort of tracking, right? So let's just keep that in mind. Who's running on what IP, things like that. So that way they can implement the provisions when the MPIAA or the RIAA comes in and says you need to block somebody. Well, now this is interesting because the U.S. government has introduced a bill that would create a partnership between the NSA and ISPs in the United States. And essentially what it is it gives them this two-way sharing of information. Now, this bill is being supported and pushed by AT&T, Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, Facebook, Boeing, and Intel. And this is being brought to sort of the attention by somebody from the ACLU, because a lot of these hearings, in fact, haven't even been aired on C-SPAN. They've been behind closed doors. So this representative from the ACLU came out and mentioned that there's a House bill in right now called H.R. 3523. And so I thought I'd go look up H.R. 3523. And so I pulled it up right here for the TechSNAP show. And sure enough, I'll include a link in the show notes with a few highlighted components. This is coming from the NSA and is to establish procedures to allow elements of the intelligence community to share cyber threat intelligence with private sector entities and to encourage the sharing of their such intelligence. So if you scroll down here, another provision that kind of reminded me a little bit of SOPA is the companies that share with the federal government shall be exempt from disclosure under Section 552 of Title V United States Code and shall not be held liable in lawsuits. So essentially, if ISPs provide whatever this supposed information is that the NSA wants over to the NSA, and then they're sued for it by customers for violation of...
What it seems here is if you're the victim of a cyber attack and you tell the NSA all the details about it, then you don't have to disclose it to your customers, the people who have their data stolen.
That's what I'm thinking.
Or your shareholders.
What I'm worried about, right, and that's what I'm thinking, is it's sort of like this. They're trying to establish this information.
It's the opposite of the recent SEC ruling that says you have to include all the cybersecurity in your corporate filing.
Exactly. The NSA is trying to establish this network that says, all right, we want to know about what happens. You can tell us about when you get hacked. But what I worry about, Alan, is the way things always happen in the U.S.
Information sharing is fine, but keeping secrets is not. And
what happens exactly? What happens when they take it a little bit further? So they start having data breaches that they disclose to the U.S. government, but then now because they've disclosed it, they can't be held liable by their own customers. So if I find out some of my private information has been leaked online by my ISP, but since they've disclosed it to the NSA, I have no action to take?
Yeah, well, it's like, if the Sony PlayStation Network hacked, lots of people got taken in there. Yeah, I don't think anybody's credit card actually ended up getting fraudulently used, but it could have. With that, if you got, all your data and money stolen or your identity stolen, and then Sony didn't tell you, which they're legally required to do, because they told the NSA and let the NSA have access to continue the investigation or whatever. No, that's not right.
It seems like it'd be in violation of a lot of state laws around the U.S. that have different disclosure policies
luckily,
too.
That would still be illegal in Canada, and so Sony would get in trouble.
I hate this crap, because also I know this is a little tinfoil hat of me, but you just seem 5-10 years down the road. Why wouldn't they just expand this into some sort of general spying policy? You get the ISPs in there who are monitoring the customers because of anti-piracy laws, and then they can just take that same information and just provide it right up to the NSA. And now I'm not saying that's what they're doing in the first iteration here with this bill, but it seems like it's just a few modifications a few years down the road, and they've already got everything all set up.
Yeah, the NSA shouldn't be giving people immunity from lawsuits in exchange for information. The
article, too, that I linked in the show notes goes to point out that it sort of breaks from standard U.S. tradition where specific military-purposed government agencies generally didn't work a lot with internal companies, private sector companies. Generally, the two sort of had a wall between them. But I guess as the cyber threats out there have evolved, they want to evolve their approach as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so information sharing about, cybersecurity is great, right? Yeah. But it should be open.
It should be done in an open way, a lot like how a lot of the cert disclosures are done and things like that.
The way that all security is handled, right? The whole point is that, it's security professionals working together for the betterment of everybody.
Security through obscurity, Alan. It just never works, and these guys just keep trying it. And and it's funny because there's been so much drum beating about cybersecurity in the U.S. I've got a whole collection of clips that I was thinking about playing on the show where they're talking about the 3 billion stat, again, 3 billion cyber attacks. They're talking about a U.S. government top-down approach to security, and they're just beating this drum like nonstop, and their solutions are all these behind closed doors security through obscurity.
Silly, break the internet.
That at their fundamental approach never work, and it's just such a disappointment. All right, Alan. Why don't we move on to a Google story that you have here on the roundup? Something out of Google I/O, right? Coming up for Google I/O?
Google has their Google I/O conference, which is a big conference about,
Google things.
Developing it's just developing in general and building the next generation of stuff.
And they've done a lot of product announcements there recently, too, the last couple of years.
A lot of they have really fundamental research and stuff coming out there as well. But basically, it's become so popular, they're getting a lot of people wanting to register. And with the point of Google I/O being promoting developers and getting developers information so they can continue to build things. They're getting too many people that aren't developers that just want to go because it's a Google conference.
Right,
and, being like, I was at Google I/O somehow gives you...
Because they give away free toys, dude. Like they give away tablets last year. I mean, they gave away Nexus phones.
Basically, you get too many hipsters going and not enough developers.
Snaps.
Whatever. So Google wants only developers, so they've introduced skill testing questions at the registration where you have to build an I/O machine.
Yeah, they call it input-output, and you have to assemble this thing.
Yeah. And so only if you can pass the skill testing question can you register for the conference.
Did you give it a try?
No. I'm not a developer, by the way.
Well, no, I know, but it's still a fun challenge. And I know you like puzzles, so there you go. I will put a link in the show notes. You could try it out. I'm playing with it right now, and I can tell you that I'm not equipped to handle this. But that's why I am not a developer, right?
Yep.
So this is really awesome, and I believe it's HTML5 too. Even though you can manipulate all this stuff and move it around, and it's all animated. And there's really good sounds too that it has, but it's not Flash, so that's pretty cool. Now, anyways, all right, Alan. Well, the next story on the roundup is a story for all of you gamers out there. Playing with friends makes you a better gamer. You think so, Alan? You believe it?
Yep.
I tend to agree too.
It's based on the same idea of, any kind of sports team or military. When you practice with the same people over and over, you get better.
I also just play for a lot longer. Yes. So, that's just going to make my skills get better too. Yeah.
But basically they compared, they looked at stats from Halo Reach, and they were comparing, one user playing with a bunch of strangers versus users playing with people off their friends list, and also the size of people's friends list and a bunch of other stuff. But basically, they found that it doesn't necessarily have to do with the skill of the people you're playing with. So if you're not very good and you're playing with a group of strangers that are really good, you don't necessarily have as much chance to win as if compared to if you're playing with a bunch of people that you kind of know and they're mediocre.
That's interesting. I mean, I know I definitely pick up like tips and tricks that I didn't know. Like,
yes, I'm playing. Also, I think when you play with the same people over and over again, you get to understand how they think and their tactics.
Yeah,
and you can do more with less talking.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So when you want to have a strategy, right? We're going to go and do this. you don't need to talk as much when it's people you've done it with before.
That's true. And that's always the best part too, when you get into a kind of like a routine like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I tend to agree because there's been secrets about games that I've played that I haven't known. And then when I sit down in a group, they're like, "Well, you could do X, right?"
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about this FBI story that has been going all around the net like wildfire this week. The FBI tries to force Google to unlock a user's Android phone.
Right. So basically, the FBI is trying a case against a suspected crime boss of some kind, having to do with human trafficking or whatever.
I believe he was a pimp. He was a pimp, right?
He was like the leader of some big gang, and he went to jail for a couple years. And when he got out, he went back to leading the gang.
I read a story that just flat out called him a pimp, and I thought maybe these other news sites have just been trying to be very delicate about what he does. That's what I kind of took it as.
Yeah, or something like that. The original press release didn't say very specifically or whatever.
Right.
But anyway, so the FBI wants access to this guy's Android phone, which I think has the fancy swipe thing.
Sure.
The motion or whatever.
The multi-gesture passcode, Alan.
That's the. So anyway, the FBI wants a backdoor around this, or to find out what the code is or whatever. I'm not. Depending how it's built, it may not be possible for Google to provide that. Right? If it's like a hash password that only exists on that phone, there is no way.
Right. Unless they have to have like some sort of OS override, right?
Right. And so, but basically, what it seems the FBI is asking for is a manufacturer reset code that would allow you to get into any phone.
Well, now I believe the way it works on Android is if you enter it wrong 10 times, it then asks for your Google account password. So it'll ask for like your Gmail password. So if you reset the Gmail password, maybe then you could get into the phone.
Maybe, but it would be harder to get that possibly. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure, but basically, it seemed that the FBI was asking for there to be some code you could enter that would let you in no matter what phone it was. And the existence of such a thing is a horrible idea.
That wouldn't be a vulnerability at all, Alan. That would just be great.
If there was such a thing, I would just start now and keep guessing until I found it. And then
I know. Think about how handy it would be. You would only have to use one code for all of your phones from now on. That could be super slick.
And all of my phones for all of your phones.
For everybody's phone. Yay! Oh, the FBI. All right. Well, any other thoughts on that one, or should we jump to the next one?
No, but the next one's kind of a big deal as well.
Yeah. So, okay, this is about ICANN. Tell me about it, Alan. What's going on?
Yes. So the U.S. government has withdrawn the contract for IANA, which is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, which controls the root domain for all DNS, including the delegations for country code specific TLDs. So the root DNS actually controls things like .ca, .co, .uk, and so on. And basically says, for those, go talk to these name servers in Canada or the UK or whatever. Also, they assign AS numbers for basically having a router on the real internet, like a serious router, protocol numbers, and all IP addresses. They assign chunks of IPs to local places like Erin and Ripe and so on. And until now, that had been under contract with ICANN, but the U.S. government has basically withdrawn that now. So,
wow, what does that mean then? I mean,
it seems that ICANN won't be in charge of the root DNS anymore.
That changes everything I know.
But apparently, the U.S. government has received no bids that they wish to accept at all. So no one else has met the U.S. government's requirements for running the root TLD either.
So does that mean the U.S. government is running it?
I'm not sure. At this point, it's still under ICANN's control. This is the contract for the next term or whatever.
Ah, right.
So it hasn't actually been pulled yet, but
they're just not going to re-sign it.
Yeah.
Jeez, wow, that's huge.
But if this goes to the UN, that sounds bad as well.
That's right. The UN wants it, so maybe they pulled it from ICANN to move it to the UN.
I don't know.
I hope not.
But I don't think it's a good idea for the U.S. government to.
No. Would you rather have the U.S. government or the UN, though?
Well, the U.S. government shouldn't get to decide who controls it.
But it's America's internet, Alan. It's America's internet. It's not the World Wide Web. It's the American web.
Well, we're talking about .ca and stuff here too, right?
Yeehaw!
We're talking about specific TLDs.
America's hat. That's our hat domain. I don't know, Alan. That's just crazy. That's a hell of a story to end the show on, man.
ICANN hasn't always done things great, but they haven't done totally botched everything either.
Is this show going to end up documenting the total collapse of the internet? I mean, what the heck? It's like every week there's a story on here that I'm just like, I can't believe they're doing that. I can't believe that. Well, you know, you got to give it. Cyberwolf makes a good point in the chat room. One thing you have to consider is it would be a lot easier for the U.S. to implement a kill switch if they just controlled everything. So you do have to give them that in consideration.
If they control the root DNS, that is basically everything.
Save some taxpayer dollars by just making it easier for them to cut stuff off. Really. And you think about all the time they'd save and all the money the lobbyists would save.
They won't have to bother Verizon to take out a .com themselves directly in the root domain.
Totes. No probs. Yeah.
Of course, the U.S. The U.S. government actually controls the servers of the root domain. Those are delegated to a bunch of different places, including the ISC and so on.
Right.
But if you control the root domain, you could change that.
Right. Right. Maybe they're just going to set up shop in Al Gore's house. Maybe they're just going to just move it all in there and let.
Right. But basically, you know, if they gain control of the root TLD and set up their own servers, they can do whatever they want.
I know. It is very scary.
Changing domain names, changing the prices, all kinds of stuff.
Seems like a story that would be getting more coverage, to be honest with you.
Yep.
It's just one of those things.
Well, basically, because we don't know what's going to happen yet, there's, you know, it's like, well, where's it going to go? And
I'll tell you, though, the way I've noticed the federal government works is you got to start freaking out and making a lot of noise. Otherwise, they're going to do the exact thing you don't want them to do. So this is something to watch for sure. We'll keep talking about it in TechSNAP.
Sure.
Yeah. All right, Alan. Well, I think that's the show, huh?
It is.
Man, there's the big show right there. Now, TechSNAP is live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, or that's 2000 UTC now that daylight savings time is on.
Right.
Of course, if you live in Europe, remember that your daylight savings time doesn't start until the week after next.
Right. So it's all funky for a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little screwy right now. So use the calendar at jupiterbroadcasting.com.
There you go.
And check it out.
jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll be back. And also, you know, we do release, you don't have to just watch it live. You can download it over on jupiterbroadcasting.com. Friday mornings is typically when the show's posted in just about any format you could want. HD, MP3, you know, mobile, tablets. The large video is perfect for tablets. So that's always a great way to consume your TechSNAP. And thank you to everybody in JBLive.tv chat room who joined us this week. I've been watching you guys as we've gone right along and been incorporating your feedback live into the show. All right, Alan. Well, good show, man. And
yes.
we'll be right back here next week.